welcome back. All right, so Hockey 101 video, but also understanding that this is a video other people might be interested in watching on the evolution of fighting in the National Hockey League. I want to talk about penalty minutes too. So as I'm going through the seasons and I'm getting ready to set up that board there for the 78-79 season, and you watch as penalty minute totals go absolutely bonkers in the late 60s, early 70s, and right into the 80s, they were insane. And I'm talking about like those league leaders, enforcers. Now, fighting is one of those things where it's part of the NHL sphere. It's always been there. They're never going to outlaw fighting. There's always the concern that they're going to ban fighting in the National Hockey League. I don't think it ever happens. Should they? Whole other conversation for a whole other time. But I don't think they ever will. I do think there's injury risk to being in a fight. But if both guys drop the gloves and they want to fight, they already know the risk at the time they start fighting, right? I would think in this age too, they know the concussion risks as well. So they want to go out and fight, whether we agree or disagree, they go out and they fight. The NHL, of course, you have 5-minute majors for fighting. I think it's that third fight. If you get into a third fight, you get a game misconduct. So when a guy's been in 2 fights, I get really interested to watch because nobody in the time I've been watching hockey that I can recall has had 3 fights in the same game to get booted out. But there's been guys who've had 2. So bench clearing brawls used to be a thing. And if you look on YouTube, you're going to find some very entertaining bench clearing brawl videos. But the reality is the NHL understood the bench clearing brawls needed to go. They could take a long time. There were bench clearing brawls that lasted over 20 minutes. So it can go on because you've got 3 officials back in the 80s. You've got 1 referee, not 2, and you've got 2 linesmen. So they would go into a group and start settling things down a bit amongst, let's say, a group of 6 or 8 guys. And then across the ice, somebody else will start throwing punches. Next thing you know, you got 7 or 8 guys fighting there. So now the officials have to go over, and then after they go over there, well, the guys they just broke up the first time, they've decided they don't like each other's face and they want to punch too. So it could keep going. So it looks bad, right? That's not something you want. And this isn't like baseball where they all come off the bench and just stand there and look at each other and think about it. And don't you, and you. Bench clearing brawls in baseball are ridiculous. My idea with baseball is simple. Anybody who leaves the dugout is immediately suspended. And I don't think you'll see guys charging the mound to fight with the pitcher if it's just the 2 of them that are going to fight. I think that would solve it in baseball, but that's my whole thing. So anyways, because it worked in hockey. Suspending guys worked. You had guys jumping off the bench to join into fights and brawls until during the offseason in 1987, the NHL realizing this was a major impediment to the league being seen as anything other than not a joke, but obviously these incidents are being carried on sports channels everywhere, and it is used to kind of discredit hockey as a sport because this is a joke. This is a huge brawl. It's like pro wrestling out there on skates. So during the 87 offseason, they introduced a rule where if you join in a fight, jumping off the bench, you leave the bench to fight somebody, it's a 10-game suspension and a minimum of $10,000 in a fine. So we always talk about fines and how small they are. Back in 1987, that's a $10,000 minimum for the fine. That stopped it. That was it. Coaches aren't going to let a player jump on the ice to join in a fight. No, because you don't want to lose a player for almost a month. So yeah, you stay on the bench. Never mind. Our guys will figure it out on the ice. So we do have line brawls, which get a lot of attention too. We do not have the bench clearing brawls anymore. And line brawls, as frustrating as they can be, because again, it can take a while. They don't take anywhere near the amount of time that the old bench clearing brawls used to take. So the NHL made a good move there. They made a good move. They deserve some credit. Fighting in the NHL has organically dropped off over the years. So eventually, coaches realized we need 4 lines. We need 4 lines that can play. We can't just be keeping a couple of enforcers who are only going to play 3 or 4 minutes per game. That doesn't help us. As analytics start to show up on some level, people realize this enforcer, every time he's on the ice, because he's not as good of a skater, he's not as good with the puck or away from the puck, he's probably hurting your team. And so, yes, the fight can be this rallying cry for the players, and I'm not saying it's not, because you can see momentum shifts after a fight. Coaches and GMs realize it's hurting the team to have these guys there who are only playing a few minutes per game. And this happens all the way down the hockey hierarchy. So NHL has that, AHL, and further down. Now, there are some pro leagues where you still get fighting. You still get a lot. There are some ECHL games where, yeah, you're probably going to have guys out there who throw a lot of punches and try to solve things with fighting. But it's not like it was. So if you watch the movie Slapshot and think, when was hockey like this? Yeah, 70s. The Flyers, the Broad Street Bullies. Although I will say this, it started with the Montreal Canadiens. Montreal Canadiens were not shy about pushing their way around the ice, and one of the ways the Flyers countered that was to be tougher than the Montreal Canadiens. And the Flyers in the 70s were nothing short of terrifying, and there was a discussion about whether or not they had ruined the sport by being the Broad Street Bullies. I have the hockey news issues and articles on it, so it was out there. Now, that being said, fighting has dropped, as I said, organically. We go from 0.64 fights per game in 2002. In 2020, it dropped to an all-time low of 0.18 fights per game. It's come up from there. I think we're at a nice holding pattern. I think it's between 0.25 and 0.3, which is right around where we are. So if you watch a game, you've got about a 1 in 3 chance of seeing a fight, or a 1 in 4 chance of seeing a fight. So it's not that they're not out there anymore. It's just they're not what they were. But one thing that stands out to me doing these videos and looking over its history is just how penalty minutes have dropped off. I'm wearing this Canucks jersey because the Canucks, for all of the talk about how soft the Canucks can be, soft, these Canucks were not that. They weren't very talented in the 80s, but yeah, if you needed to drop the gloves, there was always somebody in Vancouver that would drop them. And there's one that famously wore this flying V that might have been one of the best at it. So, 1974-75, Dave the Hammer Schultz. And they didn't call him the Hammer because he had a great slap shot. 472 penalty minutes for the Broad Street Bully Philadelphia Flyers. And he was one of the ones that went out there and, to quote Shoresy, set the tone. You go out there, you clear some room for your opponents by tenderizing the opposition. And Schultz was one of many in Philadelphia who could drop the gloves, which means for skill guys like Bobby Clark and Bill Barber, you might have a little more room out there because they have really beat up the opposition. 1981-82, Paul Baxter had 409 penalty minutes. I remember Baxter and all the fights he was in back then. It's where I started watching, was the early 80s. Bob Probert scared everybody because not only was he the toughest in the league, he put up 398 penalty minutes to lead the league in 87-88. He could score as well. So he could score goals, points, and he could fight. So one thing about fighters is that, and over the league's history, we've seen some fighters that are dirty players too. Part of it I always felt like was, well, what are you going to do about it? Because if, let's say, Gino Odjick goes out there and throws an absolutely filthy hit on some star player, I don't know, Bobby Holik when he's with the Devils, yeah, you send somebody out there to answer for it, Odjick's going to clock him. So what are you going to do about it? So if you look at some of the longest suspensions, a lot of the time it's formerly known as enforcers, the tough guys, the guys who would drop the gloves, and it's because I always took it as they weren't scared of anybody out there. So, yeah, you swing your stick knowing nobody's going to come out here and beat me up. I'm just going to beat up whoever you throw on the ice. Now, penalty minutes dropping off. I wanted to talk about this. So, 91-92, Mike Peluso leads the league in penalty minutes with 408. That is the last time that somebody with more than 400 penalty minutes leads the league in penalty minutes. 2010-2011, Zenon Konopka. There's a name for you. 307 penalty minutes. That's the last time somebody led the league with more than 300. And 2017-2018, so this is 6 years ago now, Michael Haley had 212. That's the last time somebody went over 200 penalty minutes to lead the league. This past season, your league leader in penalty minutes is Liam O'Brien with 153. Now, there are still enforcers. Ryan Reeves stands out. Of course, you've got Matt Rempe now coming up with New York. But they don't play enough, and there aren't enough fights in the league anymore to get up to that 300 penalty minutes. Plus, teams don't employ them. Because again, as I said, you can't be putting a guy out there who might be hurting your team away from the puck. So they're going to play less. They're going to be healthy scratches more. Your opportunities to get penalty minutes will be less. Plus, there are fewer fighters in the league. So it's going to be harder for you to find guys who want to drop the gloves. Going back to Reeves for a moment. Reeves at this point just needs to tap a guy on the shoulder and go, what are you doing? And right away, whatever it is, stops. People don't want to fight Ryan Reeves. And generally, that's when you can tell when an enforcer has really and truly established themselves. They don't have to fight. So back in the day, they'd get challenged a lot, but eventually, players may not want to fight them anymore because they know there's a really good chance they're going to get clocked. So 2009, 2010, Zenon Konopka had 33 fights to lead the National Hockey League. So Konopka knew how to drop the gloves. This past season, Liam O'Brien led the NHL in fighting majors with 14. Is that a lot? Sure, over an 82 game schedule, but compared to the league leaders back then, and again, Konopka in 2009 2010 had 33, that's not that much. Gordie Howe was known for dropping the gloves here and there and being a tough player. He only had 22 fights in his career. I don't think he had to fight a lot. Guys knew from the elbows that Gordie Howe was throwing out there just how tough he was. So if he had to drop the gloves, and again, going through history videos, doesn't sound like he lost those fights either. It sounds like he might have been 22-0 or close to it, to the point where even when he's challenged by really tough hockey players, he still cleaned their clock. So Howe was a tough player, I think set that bar, and then you get into an era where fighting is, I think, more plentiful once we get through the mid-70s, late 70s. Joey Kocur fought 217 times in his career. Ty Domi, the number's apparently a little bit above 330. John Ferguson Sr. is credited as being the first ever enforcer in the NHL, 1,214 penalty minutes in 500 career games. So John Ferguson Sr., he knew how to go out there and do what he did. I remember my parents telling me about John Ferguson, and Eddie Shack was another one they talked about as well. Terry O'Reilly had around 150 fights in his career for the Boston Bruins. Dave Tiger Williams, 3,971 career penalty minutes. We talk a lot about how nobody's ever going to get close to Gretzky's record for points, and I don't think anybody ever does, but nobody's ever going to get anywhere near Tiger Williams. It is rare to see a player get, like, look at this, Liam O'Brien, 153 penalty minutes. So at league leading, how many years would he have to play to reach Tiger Williams' almost 4,000 penalty minutes? It's never going to happen. Dave the Hammer Schultz, 2,292 penalty minutes in 535 games. Just ridiculous numbers. We will never see that again. Bob Probert had 232 fights in his career. Again, these numbers, I don't know how 100% accurate they are, but I went through a few different sources, and the numbers are close to one another. And again, for Probert, he probably could have doubled that number of fights if people were willing to drop the gloves with him as often as he was willing to drop them in return. It is an era that's kind of gone. There is still a toughness component to being a National Hockey League player, absolutely. And for players who can't play or shy away from that physical play, it can be hard to watch. It can be hard to watch a guy go into the corner for a puck and a really big physical player come in, and you can kind of see them tense up or back off. I think we should be a little more understanding of why players back off when somebody that's really large and scary comes into the corner after the puck. Like, here you go, sir. Would you like me to shine the puck up for you? There you go, sir. Take it. But the reality is that we're in a league now where players are bigger than they were back in the 80s, for sure. Faster. I think they're in better shape, but they're also a lot less likely to fight. We don't see the fighting in the junior leagues that we did. And that's really where things are interesting to me, is that hockey has completely changed from top to bottom. Because you're going to see fights if you're going to see a game in the ECHL. You're probably going to see some in juniors, sure, but it's not like it was. I think part of it is we understand more about CTE. CTE is not just from fighting, obviously, which is CTE can be from repeated concussions. But fighting can cause a concussion. Fighting is not something that is harmless, and it is something that is avoidable. Whereas some of the hits we see out there at the speed that they happen, they can cause concussions too, not as avoidable as a fight. But there are the hockey purists that, hope against all hope that we'll see the fighting come back. I don't think we ever see a return to those kinds of numbers. I don't feel like we could, because we don't have anybody coming up from juniors who fights like that. That's just generally not the way that players are taught from a young age to play the game. And so for fans coming in and not having watched the game before, fights can be a little bit jarring. I would imagine the first couple of times you watch, but eventually it's fine. I don't generally watch fights. I don't really care. Like if I'm watching or it's a really busy night and a fight breaks out, I'm not sticking around to see who wins the fight. I just change the channel because I don't really care who wins the fight. But for a lot of hockey fans, the fighting, they kind of like it. It's one of those features that they really enjoy about hockey. It definitely makes it unique amongst professional sports. And the question that I think will always be asked is whether fighting keeps hockey as a niche sport. If it wards off certain fans that are like, I don't mind hockey, but it's really violent. And I really don't like the violent. Like I like the goals. And again, I'm not saying that's a popular opinion necessarily, but it might be part of the reason why hockey is a distant fourth when it comes to overall revenues and everything. But do we really want to see fighting gone? Nah. I don't think the NHL will ever ban it. There's been talk about it. There's been various hearings about fighting and physicality in hockey and how dangerous hockey is. But I think that most players now understand that danger. It may very well be part of the reason why we don't see fighting quite as much as we used to. And again, I think it's a part of the game that is out for the most part. That will still be there to keep players in check, is my guess. That's usually what people say about it. It keeps players in check, keeps them honest. They know somebody might punch them in the head, keeps them honest. But it is one of those things that is part of being a National Hockey League fan that I don't think is going anywhere. But eventually, the question that's been asked, and I know there's a difference of opinion on this, is whether or not we'll ever see an era where fighting is virtually gone. I don't think so. I think there will always be times in a game where guys are willing to drop the gloves. But let me know your thoughts. Where do you think the trend ends up, say, 20 years from now? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.